Welcome back, everybody. This is an interesting one. So, do you remember when Game Pass came out and a lot of people kind of thought, hang on a second, could this devalue games? And also, if with a £1 or, $1 introductory offer for 3 months, I can just get a game and finish it? Who'll buy the games? Could this be a problem? And then Microsoft said, oh, no, it's not. Game Pass actually means more sales. We have the data. Well, the CMA, which is that UK body, we'll be talking about in the context of, the merger between Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. Their documents from this, which of course involved them looking over millions of internal documents from those companies. They've went over Microsoft stuff. Some of it's public now. I mean, no doubt through this, there are things public that Microsoft are absolutely going to be uncomfortable about.
Yeah, we actually went through quite a lot of the entire report, and ultimately there wasn't a substantial amount of value because they were able to redact figures. But some of the statements, and this one that we're going to go through today, is a very big one. That they never wanted this to be public, but it had to be because of this merger.
Here's the quote from Phil. When you put a game like Forza 4 on Game Pass, you instantly have more players of the game, which is actually leading to more sales of the game. Some people have questioned that, but when State of Decay 2 launched, you saw, if you looked in the US at the NPD, you saw this game selling really well the month it launched on Game Pass. So, what if Phil Spencer was actually just cherry picking? 2 examples, and in this case, State of Decay 2, launch, month 1 sales. Well, in the UK Competition and Mergers Authority?
Yes. That's what they're called, yeah.
In their report on the Activision Blizzard King acquisition, they went through a lot of internal documentation, and here is a line. Microsoft has also submitted that its internal analysis shows a redacted percentage decline in base game sales 12 months following their addition to Game Pass. Microsoft internal documents recognize that adding titles to Game Pass would lead to cannibalization of buy-to-play sales. This is the thing that people worried about. Microsoft said it was fine, we had notable successes on Game Pass, and we had plenty of developers and publishers be happy with Game Pass, yet this has now came out. We will later talk about how we can, square this circle.
Yes, it's a little bit more complicated than just, it causes cannibalization. But that's exactly what they're saying. And it's them having a public opinion and a private opinion, where they're like, in public, Game Pass is great, it's wonderful, absolutely, get on it. And I'd love to know if they ever share the cannibalization data with any of the people they get on Game Pass. Although, as we'll go into, they clearly don't mind too much. But for a little bit of extra flavour, it is literally, once a game's added to Game Pass, sales go down. The data is somewhat limited in terms of how their internal analysis went, but it's likely only Xbox platform sales for a start because Microsoft won't have access to other platform sales. There's a decent chance that I play this on Game Pass, I'll go buy it on Steam if it's not an Xbox game, or hey, I'll go buy it on, say, you play a Game Pass game on PC, but your PC's not great, and you go, I'll go buy it on my PS5. That could also happen, and I would have done that if Hi-Fi Rush wasn't exclusive. So exclusive working perfectly for you there. But I think it also can't be for newly released games. That's another point, because that data is based on 12 months.
Yeah.
So it's not for newly released games. That big launch surge will likely happen, but it's more about, say, a game like Yakuza, and Sega go, we'll put that on your platform. Yeah, absolutely. They are hurting their own sales on the Xbox platform. Seems to be the case, at least enough that it's because they say it does show that decline. Don't know if that's in some scenarios over the average of scenarios, which is I would expect it to be that. Which goes to show it is interesting. It's kind of a bad precedent for that internally. But the CMA go on to say that they consider Microsoft's telemetry data and internal analysis, they have some limitations. But the data suggests that while the Game Pass expanding, there's some substitution from buy-to-play to the Game Pass service. And there's possibly some diversion in the other way, but they're not quite clear on that. But it does call into question everything Microsoft has been saying, more or less.
But now, let's hear from someone who has been on Game Pass. In this case, it's Mike Rose, who runs No More Robots, who are a games publisher. They're one that I think really has been quite successful, especially for their scale. So here's what Mike had to say in response to this. Every time Game Pass is in the news, my Descenders search fills my mentions as people on both sides try to explain why Descenders is proof of their own claim about Game Pass. Of course, Descenders is the downhill, like mountain biking game that they published. And every single time, oh boy, do I learn that gamers do not understand how video games work at all. All I can say is we are aiming to get every single title we publish from now on onto Game Pass. In doing so, we'll secure success for each title and relieve immense pressure for the devs. But please, gamers, continue to explain why it is bad for us. So ultimately, that is him saying, well, per my metrics as an indie publisher, this is something we should do. I have an instant thought as to why. And it's pretty much this. What truly matters is the amount of budget that you can plan around.
Yes.
Think about it, because let's just say you're doing a game and you don't know, will you make 200 grand, 1 million, 1.5 million? You do not know, right? Until, the things came out and it's launched. And that means you don't really know, how can I scale the company? What size should it be? Can people get raises? You do not know if you're purely relying on sales. But if Microsoft comes in and is like, okay, 1.2 million. Now you're sitting there thinking, well, okay, maybe the top 40% of, because the way you have a range, perhaps, of anticipated sales. You're like, well, my top 40% of predictions are actually higher than Microsoft's offer, and I'm worried that maybe, there will be some cannibalization here. But I'll actually get that money now. Mm-hmm. I will get through loads of my rev share with my publisher, and now that I know what my financial position is in, well, now I know how much money I have to play with at a bare minimum.
Yeah.
And for anyone in business, that means how you can, because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to effectively deploy capital. If you know what your capital position is, because you can agree to a fixed deal like this, that is of immense value in how effective you can be with that capital.
Yeah, and to put it very simply, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. That's a saying for a reason.
I've never heard it before.
You've never heard that before?
Wow.
It is.
Cool.
It is effectively just, if you've got something, don't risk. It's better to not risk it for more gain. Yeah, obviously, humans are very loss aversive, but yes.
Even a good example of that, let's just say you had random monthly income of between $2,500 and $3,500. You can make it even more extreme. You have random income between $1,000 and $4,000, right? Now, the average of that is what you will have in the long run.
2.5, yeah.
2.5. But you'd find it kind of hard to plan around that because every month's different, unless you really scaled back your expenditures. For a lot of people, they would rather take a deal that is slightly below that average number of 2.5 that you said, because at least then they know every single month, this is what I'm going to get. I don't have to worry about it. This is anxiety out of my life. This is pressure relieved. I am happy to take maybe a 15% L just so I don't have to deal with the stress of a financial position that is, boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. And in a world where it is often said, a game developer, you're only really as good as your last game, which is the idea of you're perpetually on death's doorstep, which is what the finances of indies are like.
Yep.
It is humongous.
Yeah, obviously, I think that comes down to if you understand probability in that example, and say that's your only income and you're dependent on it heavily, you're going to say, I'll take the say 2,000 a month instead, absolutely, because all it takes is a few months in a row of 1,000, and you go, well, that's not very likely, but it's possible.
Look into the mathematics of advantaged players in blackjack, right, which is card counting. Card counters have got to have their card counting strategy. They will beat the house, but in order to beat the house, they need to have a very, very large float of cash so that they do not get wiped out by a string of bad luck. And it's just that thing in gambling, If you lose 50% of your money, losing 50% is, okay, now I'm down here. To get back to where you were, you don't win 50%. You have to win 100% to get back to where you were. That's the kind of thing That I mean, there are different examples, but that's the sort of thing that people, will be thinking about. So even though it may cannibalize sales, would you rather have security, stability, and the ability to plan right now than potentially the chance of slightly, or maybe somewhat, but you do not know, more money in the future?
Yeah, that's basically what he means when he says, because he didn't say, in doing so we'll be massively rich and make all the money in the world. Mike said, in doing so we'll secure success and relieve immense pressure for the devs, which implies that he knows full well that maybe in the long term it's less money, but in the short term it's the money they need to be able to take that money and go, okay, well, we'll then be able to go make another game with this money and then make more money in the long term.
To grab a line from a show that you've recently been enjoying about rolling a hard six.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to roll a hard six, but that really cannot be your long-term macro strategy.
No.
Maybe you'll win. Maybe you'll die of stress before you win.
Yeah.
And to go to back what Mike said in 2019, right, so a few years ago, this is what he said to GameIndustry.biz in response to Phil's, "We sell more copies of those games than we think we would if they weren't on Game Pass." He said, "Sounded like bullshit, right? Weirdly, it's true. It surprised me. Being on Game Pass means you basically have constant featuring on Xbox. Your game is on the dashboard all the time. People are seeing it every day. And because of that, during launch month, our Xbox sales, we didn't do discounts or anything, quadrupled. And now we've settled to about 3 times as much as before. It's essentially an advert, a straight up advert. And now Xbox is asking, oh, we can feature Descenders in more Xbox Game Pass advertising? Yes, you can. Of course you effing can." Now, will this be the experience of everything? Because evidently, Microsoft's own internal data goes directly against what he said. But remember, we're talking about probability. We're talking about distributions within a data set. Perhaps Descenders is a game that has a fantastically high conversion rate because it has a very simple mechanical loop. You immediately see what that game is in its entirety from its visuals. And I think that means it's going to be a game with a high conversion rate.
Yeah.
But there's almost certainly other games that are, not going to be as highly converting. And perhaps those are the ones for whom, Game Pass will lose you money in the long run, but maybe you want that security.
Yeah, which is very interesting to me in the long term, because I think if you look at it from the perspective of what Phil was saying, always saying, oh, it helps sales, it helps sales, it helps sales. I think that might just be the games that are going to sell more because they're better and the exposure works for them. I think that's probably what it ends up ultimately being. Or even that maybe sales directly and sales on the Xbox platform isn't exactly everything. Because if you look at, the fact that, say, all the Yakuza games are there, sure, you're not going to sell them all, but people are going to have that experience. People are going to have the access to them. You've got the no risk attached, no frills attached playtime, which is good for not just brand on the Xbox side, but good for brand on everything.
It builds your word of mouth base.
Yeah,
like
Hi-Fi Rush, hello.
Yeah. How many people purchased Yakuza on the PS5, of course, before it was on the new PS Plus collection, but before that, because it was in Game Pass first. How many people bought Yakuza games purely because their friend who has an Xbox said, oh, this series is amazing, you have to play, and the person's like, oh, it's not on Game Pass on the PS5 game. Obviously it's not. It's not on PS Plus, but I'll go buy it. Now obviously Yakuza is in PS Plus, so everybody knows about Yakuza no matter where they are, because goddamn, what a franchise.
And because it's good, that's likely going to drive the sales of Ishing, I think. Ishing's the one that's coming out, or is it recently out, whatever. That's going to sell a lot more than it did before those games were ever known to people. Some of that might be a little bit anecdotal on my side, because I follow a very specific set of people on Twitter who have very specific tastes, and the algorithm feeds me very specific things. But the amount of incredible memery I see from places I never expected to understand about that series, you're like, oh, that's had cultural impact because of exposure. Oh, sick. Nice.
Yeah, like we're not quite getting to the stage where Rishi and Kier are going to be making, Yakuza references and PMQs.
Oh, that'd be good.
But it's certainly getting out there. I'm seeing so much more Yakuza.
Yep.
Including from more general sources that I didn't think I would. Mm-hmm. And I think undoubtedly one side is if you have an overall brand, like let's just say somehow Pale Beyond got on Game Pass and so many more people were exposed to the game than maybe otherwise would be. Well, surely that would be useful when you go to do like, a follow-up or something. Like just as a hypothetical example. Yep. That's the kind of thing that also does offer a real value. And you may say, oh, I paid with exposure. But it's that sort of tricky thing. Like, paid with exposure is one thing when you're talking about being a bit of an exploitative dickhead to an artist on Twitter. It is sort of another thing when you're like, hang on, free samplers of our product, free product, and then that boosts sales of next product. Like, what would happen if Banner Saga 1 was just, I mean, I think everyone has a copy of that at this stage.
I think I have like 3 copies of it.
But like, imagine 2 and 3 were never in any Game Pass or anything like that, but 1 was. That would obviously help 2 and 3.
Yeah, I think paid with exposure is a pretty interesting way to look at it, because it's paid with a lot of money and also exposure.
Rose talks about that too. Like, hey, it's free platform advertising. The sort of thing that, by the way, if you're on PlayStation, you have to pay for.
Yeah, so I think that, to me, it comes down to, I think, instead of this, if it does cannibalize sales, then what's ultimately happening is, say, this is completely made up numbers, say you are going to sell, you think about 100%, and then Xbox show up and say, hey, we'll give you 70% to put it on Game Pass. And you go, all right, sure, fine. That's money in my pocket now. But the other 30% is an implicit kind of promise of, oh, all of the additional benefits of this that aren't immediately financial, in terms of all the exposure kind of stuff, all of the, hey, what's it going to mean for your next title? What's it going to mean for that? That'll make up the 30% and possibly more.
As a business owner, I would take that deal for our game, even if I knew I was getting 70% instead of 100%. Because ultimately, if I have that capital now, I can deploy it in a way that will be efficient, and I can be working on our future right now instead of having to play it slow for a long time because there's lots of ambiguity. And I think many people who are business owners, will understand that and would probably take a similar position themselves. Because ultimately, it is what allows for responsible expansion.
Matt?
And really, that's it. That's the video. I just thought it was an interesting topic, and I think it's one, like, there's a very obvious headline with how inflammatory, the reactions to the CMA thing is.
Yeah.
But what we always love to do is, find the headline, find the thing that's interesting, talk about it, and then, like, talk about what's behind the headline and share our own experience between running our channels, running our game studio, hopefully so that you guys sort of come out of these videos with just a little bit more of a perspective in some of these things.
Yeah, and I literally had this thought, and then I had to throw the thought out immediately, because clearly it was the point of the article was just a little bit of a thing. But I was seeing the games industry article that I first saw this news reported on, and the headline is just Microsoft confirms Game Pass cannibalizes sales. And I was thinking, man, they didn't really put an awful lot of yes but into this article. It is just Microsoft said it cannibalizes sales, and then Phil said it doesn't. There you go, and you're like, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think...
It's not very nuanced.
Yeah, it's not very nuanced. I don't think somebody's really going to come away from that knowing more about how the development of games actually works.
Yeah.
And, ultimately, if we're in a position where you can help people to understand it, because it's not just us. We know all the local studios, and, going to conventions and stuff, you talk to people, you find out about their story. I know, within our sphere, there's a few people who have been on Game Pass, and we know of their experience as an example, and it's... I think actually from what I know, universally positive, even though they probably know this going in. So it's an interesting thing. Hopefully just know a little bit more. That's our mission. So that's it for today's video. I hope you found this to be an interesting one. There's plenty more on the channel, so check out this one next. And with that, we'll see you next time.